So we are in the thick of it. Today is our putting people first, which is the core of everyone's work here today. I'll be your moderator as well with Dennis. So if you have any questions on Zoom or chat, just feel free to let us know. We will be having a Q&A section at the end. So feel free to add any questions here, and then we'll make sure to cover them at the end, if not in real time. How will we award the 1 million? So we have 3 different categories: early stage concept up to 50K, mid stage that goes up to 100K, and our advanced solutions, which goes up to 200K. During the evaluation period, we'll kind of go over what award tier is most aligned with your solution, and then we will align the allocated amount and announce it to you when we are in that stage. And then we can go straight into talking with our finalists. Oh, a quick note. This is actually a quick milestone that I should mention. Right now, we're in the idea of refinement period. So this is just for the finalists. It's ending on Monday, the July 24th at midnight Eastern time. If you are working on stuff and you would like us to give any feedback, you can feel free to send it to our climate resiliency at IDEO email, and we'll make sure to give you any feedback before the deadline. After we go through the refinement period, which again, your submission on the platform is editable. Feel free to add any attachments, feel free to email us any sensitive information, and we'll pass it along to the evaluators. The evaluation period is from the 25th to 31st. We have all of our challenge partners evaluating submissions again, and eventually our founding partners, CSA and Aon, will be deciding who the award winners are, which we will announce on August 1st. So that is a time that you'll receive an email, and then we'll also make sure we get everything set up to announce publicly as well. And then we'll go back into the award tier, and now we can get started with the finalists. So I'll pass it over to Michael. You should be able to screen share.
Can people see the slides right now?
Yes.
Great. Well, first and foremost, thank you everyone for being here today and joining us, and congratulations on making it to the finalist stage. I've been really excited by a lot of the ideas that I've seen so far, and I'm hopeful to learn about more projects today through Q&A. As Isha said, myself and my colleagues are from the Environmental Defense Fund, talking about best practices for community engagement and environmental justice, especially in the context of the challenge criteria, which we're making sure that projects were equitable and community informed. There will likely be information here that's familiar to some, if not most of you, whether you are from communities that you're trying to work with, or have already been working with communities, or have a plan to work with communities. But our goal today is to have a set foundation for everyone here, still provide some helpful insights, and then make sure there's plenty of time at the end for questions that you may have related to your specific projects. So with that, we will go into introductions. My name is Mike Lianu. I'm the Senior Analyst for EDF's Office of Community Collaboration and Engagement. I do a lot of research and project management for our community engagement goals. And I will let my colleagues introduce themselves now.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. So, as Michael mentioned, I am really happy to be here, and I have enjoyed reading some of your submissions, and I'm just excited to see where you all are going to take this next. So I'm Dr. Tanya Calhoun. I am the director of the Office of Community Collaboration and Engagement, and a lot of my work entails working with some of our mayors in cities, as well as our HBCUs, and those are our historically Black colleges and universities, and just ensuring that we are working transparently with them. And so I will probably share a lot more of my work during my conversation, so I won't overly introduce myself, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Sachi.
Hi, everyone. As Tanya said, my name is Sachi Das Kuwayama. I'm our Senior Manager for Environmental Justice Policy at Environmental Defense Fund. I will also be talking a little bit more about my work during my presentation, but my job at EDF is basically to push our organization to more effectively and authentically integrate equity and justice into our U.S. federal policy work. I'll hand it back to Michael.
Thank you. And just for a little bit about the Environmental Defense Fund, if you aren't familiar, it's an international nonprofit founded in 1967 with the goal of creating a healthy environment for all. It was originally founded to advocate against pesticides that were harming shorebirds. And it has grown quite dramatically since then, working today in 28 countries, including Europe, China, and India. Some of our projects include working with fisheries around the globe, working with corporate partnerships with organizations such as Walmart and McDonald's to reduce their environmental impact. And later this year, we will be launching a satellite to track methane emissions all around the world. I say we, I mean EDF as a whole, not me. I am not working on the satellites, but all of these projects kind of fall under the building blocks that you see listed on the slide. And of course, today we're going to be focusing on the most recent building block that EDF has established, working with communities. That focus has led to the creation of our office, the Office of Community Collaboration and Engagement, where we work to put people and communities at the center of our climate solutions. That means prioritizing community experience and expertise. And we work to support the communities that experience climate change first and worst, which I know a lot of you are also trying to do with your projects. So with that baseline out of the way, I will let Sachi talk more about our environmental justice work and environmental justice as a whole.
Thanks, Michael. So I just want to start by saying thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you all today. I'm really honored to be part of this and learn more about the work that y'all are doing. As I said before during my introduction, my job at EDF is to help manage our environmental justice policy work. So that means a lot of different things, from reviewing legislation that we're asked to endorse, to pushing for equity and justice to be considered and better integrated into our organizational stances on key issues, to standing up internal policies and processes to help us better achieve our goals. And today I'm going to share some of the basic frameworks of environmental justice that I depend very heavily on every day in my work. As Michael said, many of you may already be familiar with a lot of this, and I just hope that it is helpful for you as you start planning and implementing your own projects. Thanks, Michael. So again, many of you may already be familiar with the graphic that's on the screen. So there's many different versions of this framework out there. And I really think of this conceptualization of environmental justice as a really helpful reminder that EJ can mean many different things. So for example, recognition justice means acknowledging, respecting, and accepting as truth the experiences and needs of communities. So in my work before EDF and at EDF, I've seen instances where communities have said clearly, the solution that you're advocating for is harmful to us. And in response, I've seen many environmental organizations say, you know, we hear what you're saying, but our science says that our solution is actually going to be helpful. So this is not recognition justice. When we fail to recognize what communities are saying as valid, and we make decisions that ignore the concerns elevated, then our solutions, even when they're meant to be helpful, may actually be perpetuating harm. Procedural justice means access to decision-making power. And for this, we can think of a more positive example of the Frontline Resources Institute. This is a program that it's affiliated with EDF, but it's its own independent entity with its own mission, vision, and goals. And it aims to provide pass-through funding, technical organizational support, and convening and learning opportunities for frontline community-based organizations. And to create this program, Justice and Equity staff at EDF had over 200 conversations with frontline community groups and leaders to really build those relationships lay that foundation, create that trust, and figure out what exactly the needs are and what role EDF can play. The program itself was designed by a conceptual committee of 11 frontline environmental and climate justice leaders who helped create a program that actually serves their community's needs. And they were, of course, compensated for their time and expertise. And in March of this year, FREE announced its first cohort of grantees, and definitely happy to provide more information if people are interested in hearing about it. And finally, distributive justice means that benefits and burdens are distributed equally. And I think of this as kind of breaking a cycle of the same communities being sacrificed over and over again for the sake of environmental progress. Next slide, please, Michael. So this is another framework that, again, I lean very heavily upon, and many of you may already be familiar with the concept of intersectionality. This is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it refers to the many complex ways that systems of inequality and oppression intersect with each other and create different outcomes for different people. So to illustrate this, I often use the example of Southeast LA, which due to redlining was zoned for polluting industrial facilities, while West LA was racially restricted and zoned for residential use only. So as a result, Southeast LA today is the host of a cluster of polluting industry facilities and also a major goods movement corridor. Also, many communities in Southeast LA are low-income communities, which make it more likely for them to face barriers to access things like healthcare and green space than their higher income counterparts. So all of these things together make it that residents of Southeast LA are exposed to both cumulative pollution burden and also have the highest overall rates of disease in the county from preventable conditions such as lung cancer. So I find intersectionality to be a really helpful framework because it reminds me that problems are multifaceted and that addressing one single piece of a complex problem may not be effective without also considering what the root causes are and addressing those. And those root causes are often closely linked to these broader systems of oppression that you see on this graphic on the screen. It's also a helpful reminder to me that who I am and the organization that I am working within does matter when it comes to doing EJ work. And that takes me right to my next slide, which is understanding the context within which we work. This is important, especially for community-based work and environmental justice work, because to do this work in a meaningful and authentic way requires trust and long-term relationship building. So understanding the history is important to ensure that your work is not unintentionally perpetuating extractive or paternalistic patterns. So I hope that these slides will be shared after this presentation so that if you haven't already read the links that I included on this screen, you have access to them. These are some really helpful resources for me in my environmental justice work generally. And the last link, an excerpt of which is on the right side of the screen, is a really helpful document for me and anyone working at a big environmental organization to read. It's a letter that was sent from a group of environmental justice organizations to the leaders of these big green organizations in 1990. So that was 30 years ago more. And since then, some things have changed, but many things have stayed the same. And I'll just quickly read the excerpt. Although environmental organizations calling themselves the Group of 10 often claim to represent our interests, in observing your activities, it has become clear to us that your organizations play an equal role in the disruption of our communities. There is a clear lack of accountability by the Group of 10 environmental organizations toward third world communities in the Southwest and the United States as a whole and internationally. Your organizations continue to support and promote policies which emphasize the cleanup and preservation of the environment on the backs of working people in general and people of color in particular. In the name of eliminating environmental hazards at any cost, across the country, industrial and other economic activities which employ us are being shut down, curtailed, or prevented, while our survival needs and cultures are ignored. We suffer from the end results of these actions, but are never full participants in the decision-making which leads to them. So, pretty heavy words. And again, this is the history of the organization that I'm currently working for. Yours might be very different. But in my case, as someone trying to do EJ work at an organization that has this history, it's really, really important to be aware of it, because it makes clear that I cannot automatically assume that I have the trust needed to approach a frontline community or an EJ group and just automatically begin working together. So highly recommend taking the time to, do your homework, understand the context within which you are working, and adjust accordingly. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. I will pass it back to Michael.
Thank you, Sachi. And now that you have laid down those very helpful frameworks for us, Dr. Calhoun and I will get a little bit more into basics and best practices of community engagement, including core principles that we try and operate by within our own work, and then conclude with some specific examples of what we do. So, starting with our beliefs, we believe that we have to steep ourselves in knowledge of the community with whom we hope to work. As Sachi said, and as we'll say in more detail later, you have to do your homework and you have to leave preconceived notions and beliefs at the door. For that engagement to occur, we must go to the community, establish relationships, and build trust. We really feel that community engagement should be relationship-based rather than just project-based. And partnering with the community is necessary for engagement to succeed and achieve our desired outcomes. And that means working with the community from the start as much as possible, co-creating solutions with them rather than coming to them with a pre-made solution that you have to convince them of the validity of. So when we talk about community engagement, I think it's something that everyone has a general understanding of, but in our work, we find that shared definitions and understanding are crucial, and especially for words and phrases that get tossed around so much and in so many different contexts that they can kind of lose meaning. So just to level set, when we talk about communities, we're talking about a group of people that share an identity forming narrative. Often that's geography, but it can be something as more broadly like shared interests or shared issues that people are facing. And when we talk about community engagement, we are talking about working collaboratively with community members to address issues for the betterment of the community. More formally, it's the interaction and collaboration with all parts of the wider community, most frequently local, but it can be at wider levels as well, for the collectively beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. And the collectively beneficial component is key. Community engagement is not built on transactional relationships. It has to be mutually beneficial. And when we talk about the importance of community engagement, it can increase the visibility and understanding of issues that people in these communities face. It can empower them to have say over decisions that are impacting them. We try in our own work to provide tools and knowledge for people to better advocate for themselves. And without community engagement, we can very easily have diminished impact or even harm. We try to avoid parachuting into communities with fully formed solutions that we prescribe as a silver bullet. We always would rather establish a presence and build solutions together, and build relationships before those solutions. So one example of that, as Sachi kind of alluded to before, is when the science is describing a solution as necessary, but community members themselves are saying that it would be harmful. And two examples that I wanted to cite that kind of fit into that category are when we talk about hydrogen as an alternative fuel source and carbon capture and storage. And these are two areas that have a lot of hype, excitement, government funding from the recent Inflation Reduction Act bill. But if you ask community members, many of whom are located in heavily industrialized areas, they call them false solutions that would more than likely give cover for continued petrochemical development and expansion in their own backyards. So, it's just something to keep in mind, that it can be easy to get tunnel vision and focus on a specific solution, and lose sight of what the people you're ostensibly trying to help are actually asking for and advocating for. All right, so now we'll get into our core principles, which are represented by people, presence, power, and process. I know it's a lot of P's, but for each of them, we're going to discuss what they represent, best practices within each, and ways you can apply them to your own work. So no surprise, but the first principle is to focus on people. And to put people first, empathy must be a key focus. And to do that, again, as Sachi mentioned before, we need to do our homework. We need to understand and research the community before engaging with them. One way to do that is something as seemingly simple as defining the community. The way that you define a community may be different than how community members define themselves. And it's important to address any preconceived notions that differ from their understanding. Something as straightforward as geographic boundaries can be misleading, since so often in the past, geographic boundaries have been used to divide formerly cohesive communities. Another thing to do is to learn from the past and present, current events, historical factors, past work that other policymakers, practitioners, researchers, organizations like your own have done in said communities, whether there have been successes, whether there have been failures, because without that knowledge, it can be easy to come into a community and give the same spiel that they've heard a million times before, and that a community will immediately clock as more empty promises. And so before you've even really started, you're hitting walls. So that understanding is crucial to try and avoid that circumstance. Another way to practice empathy and community engagement is to honor the knowledge and wisdom inherent within these communities, that community members are experts of their own experiences and should be treated as such, and their knowledge should be considered as core as the science and data and research that you are bringing to bear. To do so requires a lot of intellectual humility. You might know certain things and feel like you're the expert in a certain topic. Similarly, the community is experts on certain things, and their concerns and comments need to be taken seriously. And doing so will help affirm their lived experiences, and that'll bear itself out in the work. And though these things can potentially change the scope of a project or a trajectory of a project, it's better to do that in the beginning than have it happen after the fact with an inaccurate target and understanding of the community that really can reduce the potential impact that you're hoping to have. So with that, I will pass it to Dr. Calhoun to walk through the rest of the principles.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Hello again, everybody. I'm going to pick right up at presence. So when we talk about expanding our presence, we want to make sure that we're always engaging in authentic and mutually beneficial relationships. And so those types of relationships should be at all levels, from the communities themselves to the collaborators, to the partners. And so one of the questions you might ask yourself, so how am I ensuring that my relationship is not transactional or exploitative? And so one way of doing that is to ensure that you're being transparent. So, you want to make sure you're being clear about intentions and goals from the beginning. And, even if that is creating a step-by-step process that explains in elementary terms, in some communities that might need that, and how you plan to engage in this specific community. Sachi mentioned this about, our very own organization. When we engage in communities, we make sure we discuss anything that could lead to tensions, like research that has come on behalf of our organization or organizations that communities may have worked with, and those experiences and those relationships did not turn out to be positive, if you will. So make sure you're discussing those tensions, like, well, is this something that has happened in the past? Is this what you're concerned about? Just be open and transparent about having those types of communications and dialogues with the community. And then again, establish clear roles and responsibilities, and making sure you're practicing accountability on both sides. There are things that you might need from the community themselves that help you in the work that you want to do, in the solutions that you want to provide in those communities. And so another question you might ask, how am I focusing on prioritizing trust in relationships? One of the things that we all know, if both you, your organization, and the community trust one another, this particular partnership can be very easy. We all know that building trust, it takes time and effort. And so these specific communities, they want to trust that you care about the community and the people, and that you can operate respectfully in the community. And you're not going to simply leave this community when, it's convenient for you to leave, or if the project gets too hard. Another way that, Michael and I and our team, we try to just show up in the community when we don't have an agenda. One of those ways, it's a way to convey to the community members that you care about them beyond an agenda. So if you have the bandwidth to, just kind of show up for a community event or a gathering, because it allows that community to see that you care about getting to know them before bringing said solution to the community. And so just, want to make sure, another question you ask yourself, how do you plan to sustain the relationship at the end, right? It might be just coming to revisit the community after the solution has taken place, right? Or, just reaching out to the original person you may have spoken to prior to engaging in that relationship and just saying, hey, how's everything going? So you just want to make sure you're trying to at least sustain a tiny bit of a relationship after you've done your project. And so, Michael, you can go to the next one. And so we want to talk about power. How do we share our power? And so we want to make sure we're establishing collaborative practices that ensure power sharing, flexibility, clear communication that we kind of already talked about. And so this is, efforts at the ground level, it permeate the culture of this particular partnership. And you all probably already know this, power imbalance is often the biggest barrier to community engagement, right? And so at times communities may feel intimidated when working with particular organizations or people who want to come in and provide solutions, right? And so, we talked about establishing that transparency. So once you've built that trust and established that transparency, communities never want to feel like they're being coerced into doing something, right? Especially if these solutions are to the benefit of their community. So we always want to make sure we are understanding community coercion versus community engagement, how we outreach and do things with people. We don't want to engage in the form. Don't want to engage in coercion. And so in all of our community engagement efforts, we desire, our team, I should say, to show equity in implementing solutions, because we always want communities to know that we want to work with them and not on them. And so some of those questions that you might ask is, how will decisions be made throughout this partnership, right? So we want to make sure community members have strong voices. I'm sure Michael and Sachi have covered this. And, we want to also make sure that we are demonstrating that these same voices matter. And so, you also want to ask yourself, how will results or outcomes of this project be shared with those who are impacted? So you want to practice regular check-ins. If we're working on specific projects where we're producing protocols or research instruments or deliverables, we want to always make sure we are making sure those communities see those and visit these results and these protocols and these practices and these research instruments before they're produced, right? Always make sure those communities know what's happening. And so, who gets to evaluate the success of this partnership in this project, right? You may have, your syllabus, if you will, or your checklist of what is successful, right, in this project, but let's make sure we're, again, including those community voices to say, yes, this was successful. Yes, we did enjoy, the process that went on during the solution. So just make sure we're always engaging and involving those voices that are in the community. Michael, you can go on to the next one. Thank you. So the final P is standardizing our process. We want to make sure we are making ourselves accessible for community partnership and engagement. We know that a lot of the projects that you or your solutions, have already engaged communities, right? I read through so many of the projects where you've already been able to have an impact on communities. But as you think about other communities you want to serve, don't always expect the community to come to you, right? We want to make sure we're being accessible, and at least they have an opportunity to know, what your organization and what you provide. So always be open to questions that may come to you. Our community could use fill in the blank, and I'm thinking about fill in the blank. Always understand how you can be accessible to communities that might find interest in gathering that help from you. And we always want to remember, our team always says, we may be working on a specific project. I know we keep saying project in a community, but we all know that the art of engaging a community is a process. And we've talked about this, building trust, transparency. So we all know that process is not a project. So we always want to make sure we have a specific process that we're following as we are engaging in communities. And so, some of those questions might be, can community partners without pre-existing relationships easily contact us? Are we accessible? What opportunities exist for you to learn more about getting involved in other partnerships that will also be of benefit to that particular community. And so that is how we standardize our processes. And so just really quickly, because I don't want to run out of time, you can go to the next slide, Michael. Just an example of some of the work that we do. I mentioned, we do some of the work with mayors. One of our essential partners in the community engagement team are our mayors. We all know that mayors are the frontline gatekeepers that are tasked with preparation and protection of their specific communities. And so, again, we want to make sure we are continuing to honor the fact that we want to work with communities and not on them. And in so doing so, we've established this incredible relationship with mayors who understand that same value of hearing their communities' voices and bringing about solutions together, those co-creating solutions. And so last year, we began facilitating these mayoral roundtables in the specific mayor's city with a goal to provide those mayors with the expertise and perhaps funding that's needed to develop climate resilient infrastructure projects. And so these conversations have been closed door, no press, in person with a virtual opportunity for mayors to just really exchange in conversation about their environmental and energy justice priorities. Now, so when we began these roundtables, and Michael will attest to this, we initially started reaching out to the staff saying, hey, our team wants to make sure we are connecting with you, your office first, and understanding how we can bring about resources into your communities. Some of those offices were skeptical. They're like, EDF, what exactly do you want? And you might, come across this in relationships that you want to build with communities. They might say, I don't know, in the past, so-and-so. Now, once we really talked to them about how we wanted to establish mutually beneficial relationships, we were able to have these conversations. We were able to build these relationships. They were open to the idea of us coming to them, coming to their city, allowing their mayor to lead these meetings, and allowing the mayor to also invite people who he or she felt should be in the room, should be engaging in these conversations. And the result of these conversations, you guys, have been rich in emphasizing potential resources and partnerships to carry out the mayor's visions for their respective communities. They've just been really, really fantastic relationships and ongoing partnering that we've been able to do with these specific mayors. And as you see on the screen, the African American Mayors Association, who also provide resources for mayors to do the work that they're doing. Mayors work, hardest working people in the community, their job is super hard, and we want to make sure we're providing resources, technical assistance for them. And that's what we've been able to do coming out of these mayor roundtables. And one more relationship I want to talk about is our Rise St. James community. A few years back, we developed this fantastic relationship with the founder of Rise St. James. It's an organization that has fought against a project that would have allowed a sprawling petrochemical complex to be built between two historical Black communities, crowding out all, public parks, and continuing to emit cancer-causing toxic air. And so this plant would have dumped significant toxic air pollution into frontline communities that are already facing these cumulative health impacts of prolonged exposure to the petrochemical pollution. And so, last year with some of the work that we've been able to do in the community, they celebrated 2 community-led victories against petrochemical polluters in Southern Louisiana. They, first, a decade of community advocacy had forced out this company, Southern Louisiana Methanol, to abandon plans to construct a multi-billion-dollar plant in the St. James Parish community. And then days later, a judge in Louisiana literally vacated the air permit that would have brought in this Formosa Plastics plant. Now, both of these EJ Justice wins, they were years in the making, but they were community-led, and we literally just came alongside them and partnered to stand up to these industries, right? And so before these 2 announcements came out, the founder reached out to our team in the middle of the night and was like, hey, I just wanted you to know that this announcement is coming out, that we have, this judge has vacated these air permits, and we wanted to reach out to you because you guys were on the ground with us, passing out flyers, attending community meetings, creating one-pagers for us to give to our communities, and helped us to understand how to speak for ourselves. And so those are the relationships that we've been able to build with these communities and with these partners. And it has just been, of course, on behalf of these communities, so they can continue to live and breathe healthy air, breathe clean air, drink clean water. And so you can go on to the next slide, Michael. This slide will be shared with you. These are resources that you can go through that talk about community engagement. We want to make sure you have that. And we also want to make sure if you have to reach out to Michael, myself, or Sachi, you know that there is opportunity to do that, and we'd love to stay connected with you all. I think I got all of that, Michael and Sachi. Please let me know if there's anything that I may have missed. And thank you.
That was everything we had. The only thing was Dr. Calhoun was understating her work in St. James Parish. It was to the point where they thought she lived there. Like they thought she was just a community member, and they would say, we haven't seen you in a couple months. Like, where have you been? So, she is very much an expert at walking the walk, as you can see.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your learnings. It was an honor to hear it. Does anyone have any questions for the group? You can feel free to raise your hand or pop it in the chat here. I know a lot of you are working with communities as well, so it's also a good time to just ask EDF how to navigate some of the maybe communities that you're working with, or any strategies that you're working on. Okay. Well, no problem, because we have tons of questions, so we are prepared in any case. For one, and this could go for anyone, Michael, Tanya, or Sachi. How do you determine who the key stakeholders are to engage when you are working in a community? If you are targeting like supporting a specific area, where do you usually begin?
I can answer just one of our I guess larger campaigns has been in the petrochemical space. And when we first started thinking about like, who are the communities, right, who are already in this space? Who are the communities on the ground? Who are the Sharon Levines? Like I talked about the young lady who started Rise St. James. Once we learned that she had been that person that's been on the ground for years, we literally called her up and said, hey, can we come and sit at your feet let me just say it that way. Can we come and see how you are engaging, in your space, in your community, so that we can fully understand how we can bring our resources to you. We don't know if it's, us coming into a community meeting, whether it's us providing scientific data of what's happening in your community so that you're able to speak to numbers, right? Or is it just us helping to write things for you? Is it another person in your community who we need to meet? So we try to find who that main leader was in that community. That's a part of that sharing the power, right? We don't want to go into these communities. We're EDF, we're here to save the day. We've got all the scientists and we've got all the knowledge. We literally reached out to her and said, who should we be talking to? Is it a local representative? Is it another person like you? Because I think Michael or Sachi may have mentioned, we feel like people who have been living in these communities for 50 some odd years, they are the experts in their community. They are the expert scientists, if you will. They've lived through the hurricanes. They've lived through the storms. They know how these storms and extreme weather events have damaged their communities. They know where the water has flowed after each devastation, if you will. So we literally have called and said, who else do we need to talk to in this space? I'll open the floor to Michael or Sachi.
Yeah, just to echo Dr. Calhoun's point, we're the Office of Community Engagement at EDF, but we are by no means the experts of community engagement in every single community in most communities, because each one is completely unique. We worked on a project in Atlanta last year, and EDF doesn't have a very large presence in Atlanta. And so, to do community engagement there, we reached out to some community-based groups that we had worked with in the past and let them lead the search, let them lead us to who they thought would be the most relevant people to speak with. And they immediately reached out to community elders, people in the church, and those were connections. Even if we identified them, we wouldn't have been able to just reach out to a woman in the community that's been living there for 45 years. Sorry, not 45 years, has been living there for 65 years and has seen everything, seen every single conflict with past organizations. Without those connections, we would have never had that source of institutional knowledge. So, just trusting the people who are already there. When we have mayors roundtables, we ask the mayors who they want to include. We don't set the attendance list. There are people that we think, can we include them as well? But it's all driven by who the mayor thinks are the most pressing people in those issues, because we are not on the front lines in every single community, or even, a significant number of communities. So we have to just let that be guided by those who are already there, and let it be, a process of connections.
I don't have too much to add to what Tanya and Michael have already said. I think, if you approach this as a relationship building, as a goal of building a relationship and building trust, I think, this is kind of like a silly analogy, but when you're trying to just build a personal friendship with someone, the best way to do it is to go through someone who already knows them, like a mutual friend. And so when, from an organizational perspective, I'm thinking about, okay, how can I start a conversation with this community? The best way to do it is to find someone that that already works. There's already some trust there. There's a little bit of, okay, we work with you. We understand that you're here to actually listen to us and serve our needs. So we trust that the person you're introducing us to might also have that in mind. And so I think it's just, it's important to keep that in mind. And I also think, from a power discrepancy perspective, that's also really important, because, again, this is just from our organization, EDF, we're this huge environmental organization. We have so much funding. We have a history, as I talked about before. I think being able to come in with those mutual connections is really important, because it kind of it makes that trust a tiny bit easier to build. And so yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll have Jason ask his question.
Oh, hi. All right. No, this is a great, thank you for everything that you guys are doing. This is a great presentation. It was just getting me to think about how I can integrate that with my proposal. I'm the GeoFireflow proposal, where it's more kind of a data centric, where I've mapped out the entire United States. I want to map out Canada. I've got some new GIS data for that. So in my efforts over the number of years I've been doing this, I've talked to many different stakeholders, everybody from just wildland firefighters who just really enjoyed it, to even some youth that have played it and said, hey, I'm now a wildland firefighter because I played your game 10 years ago. And as it's been progressing, I've now been talking with insurance companies and some other kind of higher stakeholders. And I'm just trying to figure out, here I see, there's coming and speaking with the people and, right in there, but I'm at a different level where I'm kind of like hitting it, like a lot of people are coming to me through the Discord, through emails. What would be the best way for me to be able to present that in my proposal, with the existing engagement that I've already had? I mean, I've had really hundreds of, training agencies and other kind of wildland agencies. What's the best approach for me to hit as far as the front line, let's say, where it's right there to, like you said, the mayors, right? Like, should I be like, maybe over this next week, just reach out to a few mayors in the area, maybe somewhere that's been kind of prone to higher wildfires, maybe in California, or in those areas, and just kind of just engage, just like, hey, I'm building this thing. Is that something that you'd like to know more about? And, just start a relationship in that way. I'm just that, I guess that's what my question is.
So, Jason, just to clarify, it seemed like there were a couple different parts to your question in terms of kind of synthesizing all the different types of avenues of engagement and outreach that you've had so far, and like pulling out what's most important. Was that part of it? Or I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
There is, yeah. Like, I do have, let's say, case studies with, but see, they're mostly with agencies, training agencies, some policymakers. I know one that were trying to sell one of their water tankers, and they wanted to be able to go to the community and show the mayor, let's load your area, let's take a look. And sometimes they just don't recognize how quickly these fires can get out of hand. And even, with the resources that that community may have, it might be good for small fires, but if you don't catch it on time, or if it's a windy day, you're overwhelmed, and you should really buy one of these aircrafts. And so it was one of these kinds of case studies that I want to be able to share. But my concern here for me was that, I've dealt with maybe higher level, like not local, but maybe regional level community engagement. And I'm just wondering the importance of me being able to get to even up to a local area or an individual person, how they would use my software to help. What the, like, I'm just thinking, should I even just kind of create an imaginary scenario where it's like Farmer John lives here and is trying to figure out what I need to do. And so you go in, you find my software, and then you load it, and you're like, oh, here's a whole bunch of resources from a whole bunch of other companies. They've offering this and they're offering that, and things that they didn't even know they didn't know about what they could do to make their property more resilient. What are the evacuation strategies that maybe the community has already engaged with, and they're able to get more information. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, yes, I have case studies of this, but I don't really have case studies at that completely local mayor level kind of thing. And I'm just wondering how important would that be to be able to integrate that into my proposal? So it's kind of a
Yeah,
two-pronged
no,
question.
I totally get it. And I think that, you know, especially to advocate ideas and solutions to people, to local communities, making it as practical and tangible as possible is one of the most important things. You know, we work with mayors and they're juggling so many different things at once, and so many of them can seem more pressing than environmental concerns or climate change focused concerns. And understandably so, you know, because the example that we had from a mayor was the electric school bus program that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And they would say, that's great and all, but I just want to get a functioning school bus system in my community and start there before worrying about whether they're electric or not. And so being able to tie it to pre-existing issues, even if they don't seem like environmental issues, even if they don't, like, just making as ways you can make it as practical as possible, as ways that you can make it as tangible as possible. And so I think case studies that tie into those concerns are a great way to go about it, because, you know, people are worried about safety. People are worried about, you know, energy, but not whether it's clean or not, whether they have electricity, right? But seeing how solutions that are, you know, environmental focus in nature also can address these concerns. And so it's really just about tying it in as directly as possible to communities that you want to work with. And I think that that can only strengthen the approach that you have, because otherwise people might wonder, why are we talking about this? Why is this, you know, this is like number 10 on my list and the other things are much more pressing. And so any way that it can become a closer to home type of top of mind thing is, I think, a really great way to approach it, if that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah. I'm just trying to process. I mean, yeah.
Jason,
Yeah, okay.
I'll give you an example of something that might, to kind of piggyback off of what Michael mentioned. You know, we went to our team, we attend the African American Mayors Association conference that they have, right? And so, you know, we come in and, you know, most of the time people are like, what is EDF doing here? Oh my goodness, why are you guys here? Like, we're talking about gun control. We're talking about education. We're talking about, you know, fill in the blank. Mayors have 1,000 things that their constituents are asking them to do. You know, Jason, we came in, we had a mayor's toolkit that we just created with one of our partners, Elemental Accelerator. This particular toolkit broke down like all of this IRA funding, right? This Inflation Reduction Act, IIJA, alphabet soup, right? That's happening right now, the grants, right? And so we had this toolkit. It was like a trifold. Hey, you guys, this is the federal funding that's available for you. This is how you get to it. This is how we can provide you the technical assistance. It literally was in a trifold. And they're like, oh my God, I didn't know I should be concerned about, you know, fill in the blank. I'll take that. Yes, we do need a climate action plan now that you think about it. You guys can help me with creating a climate action plan, and I don't have to do anything but tell you, you know, what I do and don't know about climate action, or, you know, whatever. And so that's another way that we have been able to build trust with some of the mayors that we've been working with, because they're like, oh, you guys really do care about the fact that we don't have climate action strategies, if you will. And so literally it was like this trifold went from just putting this in their hand to, yes, please come and do a roundtable in our city. So that's just one example I wanted to show you with, you know, how we've been able to build trust and authentic relationships with with these mayors' offices.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right.
That's a wonderful example. Our last question here, I know we're running slowly out of time. Both of you were actually involved in our evaluation round to get to this group of finalists that we have today. How did you interpret the community-informed and equitable criteria? And were there either things that you were looking for as an evaluator that showed strong signs of that, or were there examples that you had seen that were really powerful?
Yeah, first and foremost, I know there are a couple other questions that came into the chat, and I know we might not have time to get to them. So I put my email in the chat if people want to reach out after the fact. All three of our emails are on the slides as well that will be sent out. But yeah, I think to answer your question, Isha, in the proposals, one of the areas that I looked at first and foremost was potential risks and harms to the communities. And really, that to me was as important, if not more so, than what stakeholder involvement has there been already, what stakeholder engagement has there been, because knowing that these submissions covered the gamut from, up and running to very, very early stage pre-prototyping, an understanding of the potential risks and harms to community members and ways to address them showed to me that even if you haven't engaged with communities yet, you understand what you need to do to make sure that your project is actually helping them and isn't just, ostensibly helping them, but genuinely trying to create the impact that's desired. And so really, really thinking about not only how, because some people framed it as this would be the risks if our project didn't happen. And, I think every single project that can apply to, because I think almost all of these projects had really great inherent value, but also thinking how you can go wrong, how your own biases can take a really great idea and really potentially diminish the impact. And hopefully not, but even lead to harm. And that showed a level of caution and care to me, and I'm sure to Dr. Calhoun as well, that gave us confidence that this was a project that really had equitability in mind, that really had, this is what we need from the community to even be comfortable going forward with this project in mind, and not just saying, this is our idea, we're going to go through with it no matter what. Having some of those, sometimes it's good to recognize red flags in your own work and your own project and say like, hey, if we're seeing anything like this, we need to reevaluate and we need to take a step back and think about whether we're checking all the principles that we are hoping to operate by. Tanya, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that was kind of how I was looking at things while judging.
Yeah, Isha, you'll learn, Michael and I literally share a brain. The only thing I'll add to that is, we love to make sure you are not just bringing the solutions to the community. We wanted to see, like, how have you been engaging? What kinds of conversations? Is it hard for you to have conversations with the people in the communities in which you plan to bring these solutions? So that's the only thing that I would add to my shared brain colleague here. We just wanted to see how communication was going to happen, has happened, and how it will continue to happen with the specific communities. Yeah.
And sorry, just to add to that again, I know we're at time, but we talked about community co-creation, actual community engagement, making sure that it doesn't just seem like, oh, we had this solution, we checked with the community, they seemed mostly okay with it, we're fine. And that may have been your process so far. And that's not to say that was wrong. That's totally, totally fine. But what other ways can the community be brought into the process? Not just a listening session after an idea has already been created, but an actual, idea session where their ideas are incorporated at the beginning of a process, not at the end of a process. So those are all things that really jump out to me as checking all the boxes that we're looking for. I know we're at 3:01 now, but I hope that addressed the question.
Oh, yes, and beyond. So thank you so much to Michael and Sachi and Dr. Calhoun for joining us today and answering a lot of your questions. We will ask for the slides and send them out. And then we have a few more days left of idea refinement. If you have any questions, if you need support in figuring out how to make your ideas stronger, reach out to us, join us for a feedback session, email us, we'll provide asynchronous feedback. We're meeting with all 34 of you in the next few days. So just come prepared with questions and we're here to support you as we head into our final evaluation round. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, all.